it going to be simulcast or?
Yes, it's going to be live streamed.
Very cool.
So it's live streamed on the Real News' page and on the Baltimore-based page. Bi-weekly public newsroom when we talk about the issues that are most important to Baltimore City. Today, I'm super excited because I had this idea a while back that, while we do talk about, important issues, like we've talked about transit, we're going to be talking about housing soon. I kind of also want this to just be an educational space, and while lots of people kind of read the news, complain about the news, love the news, like, you guys don't always necessarily know how we create the news and how we work. So I just thought this would be a really fun opportunity to do that. Hopefully I won't rant too much because it's not really supposed to be my role here. So I'm really excited to have my two panelists today. Samir Rao is the A&E reporter for the Baltimore Sun, and Erica Green is the, oh Lord, correspondent in Washington who covers the U.S. Department of Education for the New York freaking Times. Thank you so much for coming out today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, so I really want to talk about, I guess, how you guys got started in journalism, because I knew from pretty much the time that I had could write words that I wanted to be a writer. And I'm wondering if it was the same for you guys. Samir, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think I had an inkling of it ever since I was a teenager. When I realized that it was just interesting to be able to tell stories and that you could do something with writing that was so, that was had an interactive real life relationship with the real world in a much more direct way than, say, like, not that you don't have that if you're making art or something, but with journalism it's just so much more obvious. I had a feeling since I made that connection when I was like 14, 15 that this was something I wanted to do, or at least possibly want to do. When I got to college, I fell away from it a little bit, thought about taking my career in other paths, but this inkling had always lingered. So I got my formal start in the industry back in, it was probably about 7-8 years ago at this point, through sort of happenstance when I was working in some part-time jobs in nonprofit admin and not really enjoying it that much because I wasn't suited for it. I met a woman who ended up being my first editor at an internship on the A&E desk at Philadelphia City Paper, which is another city paper that unfortunately no longer exists. And so I started with that internship. From there, I freelanced for them. I freelanced for some local places. That snowballed a bit over the course of a couple of years, and then I got my first full-time job in 2015 at Color Lines, which is a race and racial justice focused nonprofit news outlet that's been around for the better part of a quarter century, but in different forms. First as a quarterly magazine, and then when I was there, it had been pretty established as a specifically online publication. And then through that time, most of what I was reporting was A&E stuff, because that's just what my first draw was. I always was into arts. I was always into pop culture. I always
Can you
thought
talk a
those
little
things
bit
were
about what
really
A&E
important.
means?
Oh, I'm sorry. So that's an acronym for arts and entertainment. So I guess I use that also to sort of mean a catch-all for culture and in a lot of sort of different ways of understanding culture. But to kind of say that it's something separate from quote-unquote hard news. So things like, at the Sun, it's a pretty traditional newsroom. So we have things that are structured along different kinds of beats and desks. So you have crime and education and politics, business, things like that, and then arts is to me something that's sort of separate and removed from all of that. But I've also written about other kinds of topics and beats over the course of my career, and I've tried to integrate all of those things into a broader understanding of arts and culture, because art and culture aren't necessarily just these things that exist separate from real life. They interact with real life, and we live in these worlds of connectivity, so there are different lenses for looking at different things. But sports, politics, I mean, these are as much a part of culture as fine art or music or what have you.
Absolutely. And Erica, I know that we haven't really been in the same space often, so when I'm kind of communicating with you, it's online, and you give little flashes of your background, but I'm really interested for you how you came to journalism.
So yeah, flashes is right, but I am an open book, and and so I'll start by just start with the first article I ever read, and it was in the Baltimore Sun in 1993. Two reporters, the crime reporters at the time, covered the trial of my mother, who was pleading with a judge for a lower bail so that she could get home to her 7-year-old daughter. And so that was my debut in the Baltimore Sun. And the first journalist I came into contact with was Jane Miller, because Jane rolls up to the scenes. And it was a pretty traumatic event in my family that resulted in my mother and sister going to prison. I went into the foster care system, and to make a long story short, tonight I wrote my way through pain, like that. Moving around to different homes with your clothes in a trash bag. I always had pen and paper and books, and I knew, one thing my teachers always told me was that, I had a gift for writing. And I was infinitely fascinated by how someone could take what happened in your house and tell the whole world about it. And what I recall from that article was that the two reporters, Jay Apperson and Roger Twigg, called my mother haggard. They said Miss Bonner, who appeared haggard, and it stuck with me. And I don't like to assign too many feelings to a child, but I do know that over the course of my adolescence and as I continued to write, I knew that I really wanted to reclaim. I can articulate it well now, but a lot of therapy will do that for you. But reclaim myself in the Baltimore Sun, and that if I ever wrote stories about the worst day of people's lives, that I would treat them with a little dignity and respect, and write stories as if their children might read them one day. So I eventually went through the foster care system, got shipped out to Howard County, which was difficult. My whole family's in the city. I grew up in Park Heights. My grandmother had 12 children on Lexington Street. We're everywhere. So it was hard to leave the city. I was still part of the city Department of Social Services. Went out to Columbia, eventually was extracted from a pretty abusive foster home, went to live with friends, teachers who took care of me, got to Goucher College, which did not have a journalism program. But I latched onto this professor at Goucher named David Zerwick. Oh. Right?
That name sounds
yes. The television critic for the Sun. I told him to create a class every semester so I could learn journalism and teach me everything you know. I took courses with him. I majored in political science, communications, and minored in Spanish. I did intern at the Sun, thanks to David Zerwick. I did podcasts, though. That was back in the day. actually, they're hot now, but they weren't hot for a while.
You were a
back then.
pioneer.
They were like, it was like a boom, and then it fell off, and now it's back. So I interned there, did podcasts, and I wasn't good enough to write, and they told me that, and I like to remind them of that. And I went, and at the end of my internship, I was like, what, how can I be good enough to write? And Sam Davis, the first black managing editor of the Baltimore Sun, said, go to or apply to Columbia, Missouri, or Northwestern. Never heard of those schools before. So my senior year at Goucher, I applied to Northwestern, Columbia, Missouri. Went to Northwestern in Chicago because Oprah went to Chicago and worked out for her. And did my master's there, learned journalism. It wasn't teaching you how to do journalism. We actually wrote, was always on the south side of Chicago covering crime. That's what I knew. Being from Baltimore City, that's what I love. And now you have a little background on why. Took a semester off. Worked at the Chicago Sun-Times, came back home, and took the first job offer that I got, which was in Frederick County, Maryland. Yes, Frederick County, at a weekly.
It was super diverse, right?
What? Yeah, totally. I was welcome with open arms. At a weekly newspaper, not the daily newspaper, rejected me. I like to remind them of that. And no, I'm kidding. I just was out there. I was on 70 every day, out there covering the Pretty Cow contest, for real, the Pretty Cow contest at the Great Frederick Fair. I covered the mayor and board of aldermen. Did not cover education, covered crime and police, and I was there for 15 months before Mary Corey called me in for an interview at the Sun. I think he won't say to this day, but I'm pretty sure it was because of David Zerwick. I was 24, and it was the year after they had gutted that newsroom the first time. And so I was young, cheap talent. And I got to the Sun. Everybody was gone. They didn't have a city education reporter. Had zero interest in covering education. I wanted to be the next Edna Buchanan of Baltimore City. But that was fully covered by Justin Fenton and Peter Herman at the time. And I just jumped in where I fit. And I went out to City Springs Elementary School, I will never forget, and covered the cut of their school health center. And I never looked back. And that was 10 years ago in April. And so, ultimately, I like to pinpoint how I got into this business, obviously with my first introduction to it. But, I was voted biggest gossip and most likely to change the world in high school, so I went with that. And I just wanted to write, and I wanted to tell people stories. I wanted to cover a community that that put me through a lot, and put its children through a lot. And I wanted to rewrite our narrative in this city, and that's how I got into this business.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now I want to interview you. There were a few things that I think you guys both touched on in your story that are very indicative of journalism today. You talked about writing for Philadelphia City paper, which no longer exists. Erica, you talked about the Sun's newsroom being gutted the first time, because I know that they just recently had a round of buyouts. And those are kind of the realities that we face today. I think all of us, I used to work for the Baltimore City paper, RIP, and have kind of had to hustle. Why do you guys, in the face of our business being kind of a very scary place to be, in the face of sometimes, the president of the country having things to say about the work that we do, people not always being appreciative of the work that we do, what makes you guys still turn up and do the work that you do every day? Maybe start with you, Samir.
Sure. I think for me, the big thing is I'm passionate about the things, when it's good, it's really good, right? So when you have stories that can really connect with a sense of personal mission, that connect with this sort of sense of like wanting to really tell a story that maybe hasn't been told or that needs to be heard, there's kind of nothing better on the face of the earth. I've never been able to like replicate that feeling in any other part of my life, and I've never been able to do it in another job. I think that there's just something about having that tie to a story that keeps me coming back, that just keeps me interested, keeps me wanting to come back to tell more of these stories. I also, part of why I chose to focus my career on the beat that I have is because I think that arts and culture is a useful lens for people, and a commitment to using that lens to tell stories that connect us and bring us together more than they divide us or vilify us is really important. Which isn't to say that I'm averse to like covering things that aren't like happy or whatever. I mean, you have to do that quite often, and even in the arts and culture beat. But that's kind of what keeps me coming back. And also what keeps me coming back is like the possibility and the hope that we haven't fully seen the like end of times for the industry, that there's a better way that is still on the way that we haven't seen yet, because it's hard to imagine things outside of our present reality, especially in this era of like such of a deluge of information where media is literally, changing so fast and is so much a part of our lives in ways that it wasn't 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think there's a better day coming for this industry at large. It's hard to see that now, but I think that, I don't want to like say that it is one thing and then find that there was a solution that was on the way the whole time. I sort of equivocate it to like people who talked about like the decline of the music industry, only to kind of see that the music industry was able to bounce back a little bit because of like the advent of SoundCloud rap being such a huge moneymaker for labels. I mean, could people have predicted this back in the 90s? I don't think so. Could people have predicted that there was such an interest in music in 2020 and 2019, 2018 that it would actually revive part of like a dinosaur-esque kind of system of labels? Like, I don't think so. So I hold out hope that we haven't figured out, that we still have to figure out how to properly fund this industry in an equitable and ultimately empowering way.
So, I mean, for me, look, so right now I'm at the New York Times. We are not failing.
You are not.
Despite what you heard. And so I'm in a very different place. And, I'm not worried about my job every day. But I will tell you this, so I've been at the Times for three years now. But when I was at the Sun, I mean, I would have been at the Sun until the lights went off. Like it was very difficult for me to go to the Times because, we faced a lot of, it seemed like every month we were reading about another potential buyer. I saw buyouts, and I always just had that idea that like, if it was my time, it was my time. And I don't, and maybe because of where I come from, I just, I always was prepared to walk out of the Baltimore Sun with my head high and make sure that the last word that I wrote mattered. And it just, maybe because all I ever wanted in life was to have a job that I enjoyed, that fulfilled a purpose that I felt I had been called to, and be able to take my children out to dinner on Fridays. Like, I didn't want much, right? So everything else is cool. So, so why do I do it? When I was in Baltimore City, there were 80,000 reasons, and that was 80,000 children in the public school system. And the parents who called if they couldn't get an answer from the superintendent and was like, Eric, go get it. And the educators who knew who to call if something was going down in a school. I mean, that's why I did it. And, at the Times, now there are 50 million reasons. And, I'm at a national newspaper where not a lot of people look like me. I'm in I cover a beat where there are I can count on how many, I can count on one hand how many there are of us covering education at the national level. And I'll be covering education for 10 years now, and I've been thinking, like, is it time for me to do something else? Is it time? And I just cannot. And every day I walk into the New York Times, I have my visitor pass up above my desk to remind me that same ethos, right? Like, if this is my last day, the last thing I write needs to matter. I think I'm employable. I never was a waitress. I always thought that if I were to do something else, I would do things that I thought I would enjoy. But look, like, it is rare to have a profession where you, like, literally change people's lives if you're lucky, every day, or you change laws once every 5 years. It is rare, and it's a blessing. And and with all the blessings in my life, I felt that if this one was coming to a close, then so be it. That's it.
I think that sometimes there are people, like, I think one of the things that's really special about you is that there are people that see Baltimore as a stepping stone, and there are people who don't and that are like Baltimore no matter where they go. And, like, you're one of them. I'm trying to think of, what is his name? He does, he writes for the Fader. Lawrence Burney.
Yeah.
Like, he's Baltimore wherever he goes. And I think that that's, like, so important for the city to be, like, to not be ashamed of where you came from or ashamed of the city, but kind of, like, take it with you.
Yeah, I'm an asset.
Absolutely.
And that's what, when I was freaking out when the New York Times came, and I was for like a week, having a complete meltdown, I went to my people, even people in the school system, like, oh my God, am I selling out? Oh my God. I was having this whole thing. And they were like, you better take us to the New York Times. What do you mean you were considering not going? And they're like, no, we going to the New York Times. And I was like, all right, I get it. But yeah, that's that. And at the Times, I mean, there are a lot of people who know a lot of things, and they're smart, and they're tireless, and they're super hardworking. But like, I know things too that they don't know, having grown up in this city. There's a reporter sitting at the New York Times where if I'm reporting on reading scores and some superintendent tries to tell me that their reading scores are low because they're teaching traumatic kids, and I can say to them, I was a traumatic kid and I can read, that matters. That matters. And it'd be quiet on the other end of the phone too, because it happened. It happened a few months ago. And I was like, I think you should try again. But no, we have a lot to offer, and I always say we went to the New York Times.
I mean, and just to sort of piggyback off that, I mean, this is such a special city, and I don't think that gets said enough. Baltimore is an extremely special place. I see it in the art scene every day. You have people who create here and create things that if they were feeling the pressure of having to use their art to subsidize a massive paycheck or like some benefactor or something, I just don't think I would be writing the same stories if I was somewhere else. And I'm not interested in, like, to be frank, I'm like not interested in a lot of these bigger national stories. Like, they're interesting. I don't have much of a pull to cover like the next big movie that comes out that's like some big hit for representation. I mean, there's going to be a million people covering that already, and I can enjoy it as a consumer, but what happens in the city is really special, and people don't necessarily know that. They only see, whenever I tell people about where I live who aren't from here, they're like, oh, The Wire.
Right.
And it's just like, you literally everything that happened in that show happens in your backyard. You just don't see it because, you live in Bushwick and all of your neighbors like go to the same artisanal like grocery stores or whatever. And it's just like, to me, you're in touch with something that's really, that I think is like sort of the best of what this country has to offer in a city like Baltimore. It's people who hustle and make things out of a void of other kinds of, I don't want to say a void of other options, but like, I mean, I just, hopefully to people in this room, all I have to do is say names like Abdul Ali and like War on Women, and like, you kind of get it. Like, that's what this city is about. It's a really, I wrote an op-ed about it recently that was in the Sun. It was just like with particular relevance to the music scene, but you can apply this to other things and other fields. I mean, people create here and they're brilliant, and just because they don't get in at like the Whitney Biennial every year doesn't mean that they're not like worthy of consideration. So it's that kind of thing that keeps me coming back as well, just knowing that people are creating fiercely and fearlessly in this city.
You guys write very different types of stories for very different audiences. You're here in Baltimore writing for the Sun. Erica, you're writing for a national audience. But can you guys talk a little bit about process? Maybe we'll start with you, Erica. Like, how does a story come together? Are you pitching stories? Actually, maybe people don't even know what pitching means, but like, are you the one suggesting stories, or people deciding them? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so at the Times, I generate the majority of my own stories. A really great thing about the New York Times is, they hire me to cover something and they expect me to cover something. They don't dictate what I do. They expect me to be an expert. They expect me to know what is worthy of coverage. They expect me to know what's going on the beat to which I was assigned. And they've actually allowed me to branch out, and because I was in a very narrow kind of federal policy role when I first came in, because I was hired to cover the Department of Education and Betsy Devos. And, after a while, that it became very clear that that could not take up all of my time. But, I also just had stories that I covered here that I wanted to cover in other places. When everyone was up in arms about school discipline and racial disparities, yes, I jumped in on that too. But that's something that I had done here. I mean, there is nothing that I have covered at the New York Times on a national level, save a few higher education issues, because that wasn't my territory here, that I did not cover in Baltimore. So when people were freaking out, I'm like, Alonzo did that like 5 years ago, like, oh, okay, charter schools, we've had those since 98. Like, so I come up with my own ideas. I have a running ledger of stories on a Google Doc that I send to my editor, and he goes in and he looks and tells me what piques his interest and, what he could pass on. But I have a lot of autonomy in that regard. And usually, I'm driven by the news. So if there's something topical, not everything topical, but if there's something that I think deserves a deeper dive, I will find a school or a school district in the country that I think illustrates the point. And I'll say I'm going. And he's like, let me know when you get back. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I'm juggling like 5 different stories at a time. In my latest review, that was like the only criticism I had. He's like, it was that I seemed to be always, I'm like, I consider myself like a chef. Like, I got things boiling, and I'm like checking on different things and at different times. And then when something's like rising to the top that I think is ready to be done, I'll seize on that for about a week. So it's like running a little mini household, really. I mean, it's like managing people. It's managing content. In journalism, we call our story list a budget. So it's like managing a budget. But I pitch 99.9 and have pitched 99.9 of the stories that I've done at the Times.
And so what is it like, so you can travel to wherever you want to go cover these stories?
Wherever I want.
And then talk a little bit about the editing process. Is that scary? I feel like it would
not
be
as scary as I
scary.
thought it was going to be. And I'm for real. Like, I would cry every Monday before I got on the train. Ask Liz Bowie, because I would call her. No. So one thing that the Times has, I really do believe above the rest, is really great editors. I think personally that I have one of the best. And it's a relationship with your editor. So sometimes I turn in things that are on the money, and sometimes I've rewritten it 2 times, and I'm like, I can't do anything else with this. Can you just take it? And he will. But it's depending on the story, especially the ones that I do, and the fact that I'm very protective of children. And I tend to cover pretty sensitive things and topics. It can be a lot. There's a lot of back and forth. It can be over 3 days to a week, and you can probably tell I will fight for everything that I think is right. I will push back against things that I think are wrong. But it's not that scary. It's not that scary, because at the end of the day, if you have a great editor, you're a team and you're both working toward the same goal. If you don't have that, it can be complete and utter hell. That is very true. But I've been very lucky, even at the Sun and at the Times.
And just to kind of understand that I need to explain,
Sorry.
to explain to other. No, it's not you. So editors, there can be kind of copy editors who make sure that you're spelling things right, you got your facts right. But there's also content editors, and those are the people that really sometimes can help shape your story. Be like, I see a story in this, but where? And help you kind of say, well, no, not maybe this, and pull this part out more. And I think that's kind of more what you're kind of discussing.
Yeah, my direct editor is the one who takes the words and makes them prettier and restructures them if they need to be, and will send me back if he feels like that doesn't happen very often, but if he feels like there's something more that he wants. But then it goes to a second editor, and they read through. And usually people are very respectful at the Times. So the second editor respects what the last one did. And depending on the story, I've had to have stories go through the very top editors in New York. That's kind of scary. But after a while, you're like, okay, here we go. Won't be able to do anything this weekend. And so, but that's like maybe 1 or 2 or 3 a year, for me anyway. I think other folks on other beats have to deal with that level of editing a lot. But they really do have great editors, and hopefully if you have a good one, they know you. So the best thing that I say to my editor is like, that's what I meant to say.
Yes.
That's how I meant you. And like sometimes I know what I'm trying to do, and I'll put it in there, and I'm like, you know what I'm saying? He's like, I know what you're saying. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I can always tell when I'm not doing anything for the weekend when I get, so this is a good start.
Yeah. It's all here. That's the worst. It's all here.
So Samir, talk a little bit about how you create your work.
Sure. So, aspects of my process are very similar to Erica's. I have a lot, not all of it. Probably I'd say about like 85% of what I do is stuff that I generate on my own. And that'll usually come from if someone has tipped me, or if I get a press release or an email. I'll give an example is like I got an email or like a DM from an artist, from a musician who said, hey, I'm doing this thing, I'm putting this album out, or I've put this album out, wondering what you think about maybe writing about it. And I have to pitch editors, my direct editor, to confirm an idea. I don't get like free reign and really over what I cover. It's curated only insofar as I'm the one that comes with the ideas, but it still has to go through this other level of approval, which often is also another level of workshopping, because it'll start as one thing, and the editor will say, well, what would be really interesting is if you did this. So to give an example is like I did a story on and I might be fudging up some aspects of this process because it was so long ago, but the musician Abdul Ali reached out to me pretty soon after I started. They said that they had put out this album, they had a show coming up. Was I interested in writing something? I went to my editor, Kamal Hai, who used to be at the Afro.
He was my editor there.
He's Lisa's editor at the Afro. And it kind of, through conversation, turned into something different, which was, I wanted to just kind of do a straight ahead profile, but initially that's what I wanted. But then it turned into, why don't we ride around with Abdu and then they can sort of show you parts of their upbringing, sort of not just their childhood, but sort of how they came about in this city and different parts of their life. So we did something where I picked them up, drove around different parts of the city. We drove to where they grew up. We drove to the Crown where they used to put on shows. And so at its most interesting, that's kind of how the process goes. More often than not, it'll be like a phone call interview, especially if I'm interviewing someone who isn't like based here or might have been like was from here but isn't based here. Some stories come from him, from Kamal. Some stories come from above him. It just kind of depends on the day and what is popping in the news, and also what other things I might have on my plate on any given day. And like Eric, I juggle a couple of different stories at a time, all sort of with different timelines. I think of it as sort of like tending a garden, but I like that house metaphor better, or the cook metaphor better, because chef, because, well, I'm a cook, you're a chef. Because my stuff's a lot less refined and probably fixing to boil over at a certain point, but it doesn't really matter because it's part of the food. And that's just kind of how the dish ends up. But yeah, similar to her process, I'll file something, I'll write it up, have to usually handle some other parts of the process too, like scheduling a photo shoot or getting photos from someone on the interviewee's side that can be put into an article. Sometimes a little bit of like ad hoc sort of on-site production for those things, but that's very rare. The Sun has really, really good photographers and videographers. And yeah, it'll go through an editorial process. Usually it's just a back and forth once or twice with the editor. If he doesn't have questions, he'll put it up at a certain point. If he does have questions, he'll send me a draft back and have questions in the like notes of the article. It's like, kind of like a Google Doc, but much, much less sophisticated because it's just on our website, which is kind of like a Drupal, like WordPress style sort of content management system. And yeah, we'll like just do, sometimes it's a prolonged back and forth. Sometimes it's a back and forth that stretches out over a couple of days, especially if it's a kind of story where if it came from above him, the people above him have to look at it. Sometimes something will be like maybe a little controversial, and then that usually will get that other layer of oversight from editors above him. But that's pretty rare in my beat. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of how the process goes. I mean, mix that in with a lot of answering emails, texts, trying to tweet articles out, talking to sources, and you kind of get the gist of what my day-to-day looks like. And also, I should say that there are some stories that are just like really quick turnaround. I do dailies still. So I'll get an assignment usually. Usually I don't pitch these. Usually these are assignments. And then you call like 2-3 people, type it up, put it up. If there's more to add later, you add more later on. But sometimes those are the kinds of things where it's like you have to balance between having these things that are like a bit more in depth and wonderful and like kind of take every turn that you want it to take in terms of the research. And sometimes you have to say, well, what's the best way that I can get the best, most verified information as quickly as possible so they can put something up and, have things to run at a peak news hour around like the middle of the day, or have something ready to run the next day. So that's usually how it works. And we serve online like more so than the print, just in terms of the speediness of how things go. which isn't to say that things don't end up in print, but most of my stuff is confined to about 2 sections, which is the Sunday Arts and Entertainment section, and then Weekend on the Street, which is like the free sort of weekly-esque pullout that you'll probably see in places like Ida B's and whatever your favorite cafes or bars or museums, venues are. So that kind of stuff tends to be a bit more regimented. Mostly things will go up online because that's where most people are going to read them.
And one of the things I think, I would imagine makes your job so kind of overwhelming is the dearth of places that can write about arts and entertainment. Like I said earlier, City Paper's gone. You know, a lot of other places, you know, I have The Beat, but it's literally 2 of us, or the Fishbowl, which has like 2 people. So I imagine, I know on my limited perspective, I have, you know, a lot of arts venues kind of pulling at me all the time. I imagine for you it's even more intense.
I couldn't tell you if it's more intense, obviously, but I mean, it's definitely can feel intense. You know, I'll get calls from venues, from bookers, from people trying to publicize their clients every day. And a lot of times it's people that, like, because we're so focused on the area, I just can't write about them. Like, I got a call today from someone who was telling me about, like, his client who's, like, a comedian who's coming to town. And it's like, and I now run event listings for the Sun too, like featured event listings, which are like sort of one-liner event preview kinds of things. So things can get featured in there, but it takes a certain kind of story to like elevate it to the level of like, we'll write a daily about it or we'll write a feature about it. They're usually a bit more conceptual. They're not just individual driven. There's like other elements to it. And that's not the case all the time, but that's at least the case some of the time. And yeah, I get a lot of people ask me like, hey, where's the coverage? Like, why aren't you covering this? Or like, do you know about this? And it's just kind of like, I would cover everything if I could. I have other layers of approval. I have other people to convince that things are good ideas, regardless of what I think of them. So, you know, I certainly get that dearth, and it can be overwhelming. The flip side to it is I get sort of like an inside scoop on all of the things that are, I think, the best things about the city, like within its art scene. So it's a double-edged sword, but it can be alternately very overwhelming and very interesting.
What do you guys wish that people knew about your jobs or journalism? And anybody can grab that.
Well,
We have bosses just like you.
Yeah.
We can't just write whatever we feel. And, you know, all jokes aside, like there are rules, right? And it kind of drives me nuts, especially in this day and age, to see some of the vitriol. I will say that, you know, maybe because I cover education, I cover Betsy Devos, and people just feel one certain way about her no matter what I write. But it's especially some of the attacks against the Sun, like it drives me crazy. Like I mean, and I know that it, you know, that won't sit well with people, but you know, there are, you know how when you were in school and you had to write a paper, and your professor or your teacher was like, use primary sources. Remember, you learned the difference between primary and secondary sources? We have the same thing. And guess what? For better or worse, even if it's for worse, the Baltimore Police Department is one of them, right? City Hall is one of them. You know, so I do sometimes, I sometimes watch some of this stuff, and I get it a little bit, but I'm like, what do people think, like, we are supposed to do? Like, you know, if we get a piece of information, not publish it because we don't believe it, or because it came from a police department that nobody trusts. I mean, those are real issues. Do not get me wrong. But like, I just wish sometimes that someone, like, that people understood that there are rules to this. And now you have some, you know, understanding of the layers of editing that our stories go through too. And I'm one of those journalists who hate to say like, oh, well, my editor did it. And I don't do it because if something goes down in one of my stories that someone doesn't like I own it because my name is on it. But those people really do exist. And like, you know, there's some real, I mean, one line, like lines get taken out of my story, one-liners, right? That because they irk somebody 3 degrees above me. I mean, that happens, you know? And so our pursuit is the truth, and I think we take that very seriously. But we do have expectations and standards, and I'm not saying that they're perfect, but that we have to meet to work in our jobs. And it just feels like people like forget that. We're also human beings.
I also think that there's like, that kind of shows that there are so many kind of different lanes and shades to journalism. Like, what I do is not, I don't really write much at all right now because I'm too busy, but like when I have, especially the stuff that I did for City Paper, a lot of times it started with the Sun story.
Yeah.
So like, it's this thing that happened, you know,
Yeah.
a kid was arrested by the police, or a man was shot and police thought he had a gun and he didn't. And then like, the kind of work that I do is like, what does this mean? And what does
Right.
this say about the world that we live in right now? And kind of like, who are the people that are now putting things into motion as a result of this issue? So they're like, that's kind of, I guess, one of the things that I wish people kind of understood more of.
Yeah.
I
And
also,
that maybe if we mainstream, you know, publications did more of, you know, the what happened and then followed up with why it happened, I think we would, you know, I think folks would be a little bit more forgiving. But let me use myself as an example. Me and Justin Fenton reported that downtown was shutting down on April 27th at 12 o'clock p.m. Yes, I did it. I own it. And here's the deal, and this is one that's controversial. People don't come for me over there; they go for him. But
yes,
I was a
do.
part
I
of.
didn't
They
even
really
know
do.
that was you also.
I don't know how I escaped, but bring it, because this is. I'm sitting there. I'm the education reporter, and I'm like, I ain't going down there. This is not my business. I'm just covering education. And I hear about a purge, and I'm like, nah, I'm not. This is not happening. I'm not getting involved. And like, we held out. We weren't like, ooh, a flyer. Let's write about it. Businesses literally started shutting down. People were pouring out of downtown businesses because the police told them to lock it down. Once that starts happening, we have a responsibility to report it. Now, from the feedback, it seems like people wanted us to be like, is y'all making this up? Like, we are literally dealing with a city that's on edge, right, already, because it wasn't the first, I mean, the 25th had happened. The protest the weeks before had happened. So we know we were on edge. I was with the mayor at Gilmore that morning. The funeral was taking place. We knew that it was a city on edge. If you find out that the whole downtown is shutting down, you report it. And if you don't, what good reason do you have not to? And so I've never understood that. Like, it was like you guys got duped into promoting the purge. No, we didn't. We reported on the day's events. We didn't report, you know, well, eventually, actually, the flyer was true because kids did walk out at 3 o'clock. And that wasn't a police source telling us that. Again, I'm the education reporter. I'm sitting at my desk. I'm determined I am not leaving it. And I get a phone call from inside Douglas being like, Erica, the kid's about to walk out. And so I got to roll. Like, but the narrative that emerged from that about the Sun starting a purge was crazy to me. It was, I mean, we took our time. We called. We made sure that it was true. We heard from the police department. We heard from businesses. And the story evolved throughout the day. So that's just like one of those examples that I really wish someone would tell me, like, what we were supposed to do differently. As you can tell, I'm really still heated about it.
I mean, just to piggyback off of that, I mean, like, yeah, I think, here's what I really wish. I wish that people would understand the context of how newsrooms work, and I think part of that's on us because the press is not very good at communicating, I think. Or they're not always very good at communicating what happens inside the newsroom, right?
The irony.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. And if I could fix it, I would, but I can't. At least not just by myself or from my like sort of limited perch in the newsroom. And this is also something I learned in much more sharp focus after I stopped working for a nonprofit mission-driven publication and started working for like a daily paper of record in this city. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I just sort of wish people understood the context of how we worked. It's like, I get a lot of complaints, as I mentioned before, about people who think that we don't cover them, or that we're like not doing enough to cover things. And it's like, there's a context to why there's no person that I like hate and I'm just like withholding coverage because I hate them or because I'm like some egomaniacal person who just like wants to like make arts organizations suffer by withholding this precious, like so intensely desired coverage. And like I'm somehow, you know, and not that people necessarily make that direct accusation, but it's implicit when I get complaints about things. You got to understand, I mean, there's context to this. I'm one of only a couple of people on my desk. There's only so much I can get to over the course of a day. I have to pitch, anything I pitch has to go above me as well for a layer of approval. I mean, if you could do whatever you wanted to in your job, you would do it too. We can't do whatever we want to in ours either. So, I mean, that's one thing I just wish people understand. And also, like, just the broader context of the industry. It's like, we are an industry like any other at the end of the day. And no, that doesn't mean that we have some, like, mechanical sort of, like, orientation to the world. Like, we're putting out some certain kind of agenda. But what it does mean is that we can't be everywhere at once. We can't do things without approval of other people. We function like any other business in that regard. As Erica said, we have bosses, we have rules. And yeah, we also are human beings who are liable to make errors and we have to sift through a lot of information. We're not robots, so sometimes we screw up. Sorry, but there's a human at the other end of that news. And I don't think people understand that. People like to paint media as this monolith, and it's like, I mean, if you're going to do... And politicians do that a lot as well. And it's like, if you're going to do that, you're just going to be upset because you're not getting at the heart of what's going on in the broader industry, but in specific publications as well. I don't know if that makes sense, but I mean, that's just, yeah, I just wish people would consider the context of things more. Like unless someone at a publication is in fact out to get you and you can prove that, no one's like out to get anyone or like ignore or like be malicious in intent or naive in understanding. Like people are just trying to cover what they can on a day-to-day basis.
And there are some fails, don't get me wrong. Like
Right.
There are some.
I've committed a few myself.
There
but
are
like,
some. Well, I know reporting the businesses wasn't. But no, I'm kidding. No, I mean we don't get it right, but but think about it. Imagine if everything that you did at your job was public, right? Like all your screw ups were public, or your blind spots were public, or your really terrible emails were public. I mean, that's what we do, and that's what we sign up for. So don't, I'm not looking for a pity party. But I just think that, it's amazing to me when people, I don't get that much hate mail, especially compared to my colleagues, or even at the Sun. But I remember it's amazing to me when people write really nasty stuff to you on the internet or via email, and when you respond to them, they immediately back off because they don't realize, they don't think you're going to answer. And when you do, you remind them that you're not like a robot on the other end. And And, you know, I just, especially right now in this climate, I just think we have to be better to each other. But you can probably tell already I'm a softie. Like that's how I operate. Like you got to treat people like people. And you can demand better of them and expect better of them. But when have we ever gotten the best out of each other by tearing each other down? It's gotten crazy.
I think also, this panel looks the way it looks intentionally.
No.
Because you put me in charge of stuff and I'm black and brown people in the state. But like, this isn't what journalism looks like as a whole. And so sometimes I think that people are aiming criticisms at you guys when really it's the very monolithic people upstairs. You know what I mean? Like sometimes people don't understand that and that's really when I'm complaining about the New York Times, when I'm complaining about the Sun, it's because I want those people to look like Kamau. I want those people to, I think I DM'd you one time and was like, can you just run the New York Times, please? And you were like, no, I don't even want to. But like that's where a lot of my criticism comes, because I'm like, there's just blind spots that you don't see if you're not living life, and I think that there's still so far to go in our industry.
That is the truth.
So like anytime you want to run the New York Times, please.
That's a legacy I cannot reckon with. I just go and do my little education thing.
I'll let you finish and then we'll open it up to, I really want you guys to talk to us, and like if you guys have questions, I'd love that, but we'll let Samir kind of have the last word.
Well, the only other thing I wanted to add is, you know, there are problems with our industry at large, and there are problems with individual publications. But just like problems at any company that you might work for, like, I'll put it this way. I mean, like, what if people had issues with how the school district was doing something and they laid all the blame on individual teachers? Like that would kind of be inaccurate and messed up, right? Because not only are you leveling criticism at lay workers and people who aren't necessarily in the power to fully change how a school system is run, you're also indicting a whole system, and it's not going to be the most powerful that are most affected by it, right? That's just how power works. So I just invite people to sort of consider that when they make institutional critiques. I think those are important critiques to have, because there are a lot of problems with our industry. I don't think it's as diverse as what should be represented in this population. Funding is an issue. I think that affects power in the industry in really unhealthy ways as well. I mean, you'll never, I think, ever meet a journalist who's like, you know what, I just kind of clock in for a couple of hours and that's fine. There's a lot of unhealthy dynamics to the profession and trouble things that do affect, I think, how publications are run. But it's, and I speak in the abstract because this is, I think, an industry-wide issue, but it's, especially when it comes to the diversity thing. But it's, there are people in a lot of publications who might be fighting battles too that you don't necessarily know about. Like I used to serve on, and I'm still pretty involved with, I used to serve on the board for the Asian American Journalists Association. And that is an organization that, like, if you were privy to some of the work that our board does, both in like op-ed pages, in sort of behind the scenes chats, you would know that there's movement that's happening in this industry that's headed in ostensibly, hopefully, a more equitable direction to make the industry better. A lot of newsrooms have in-house diversity committees as well that are tasked with working with higher management to make sure that hiring is being done in ways that represent the demographics of the country, of the city. And it's a battle, like anything else. It's a struggle. It's not, you just form these things and it's cut and dry. But then that's like how it is in anything, whether it's like the arts space or the political space or the civil space. We're not immune from the problems of the world, but it also means we're not immune from, hopefully, the solutions being put forth as well.
And hiring isn't the end all and be all either. We can, once you get there, you start over. It's a whole other round that you go through. And that's when this is not being live streamed. I can get into that.
So yeah, please, would love to hear from you guys. If anyone has questions or comments, we got a microphone right there. Don't be shy.
Hi. Oh my gosh, what an entrance. I'm Anjali. I'm the opinions editor of the UMBC Retriever.
Say that again.
I'm the UMBC, the editor of the UMBC opinions page at
Oh, awesome.
the Retriever. So I'm one of two people of color on our editorial board. So hearing you guys talk about this is really interesting, and we are always looking to have more diversity on the board. Our school is majority minority, so that's really important. My question is, we deal with our administration a lot. There's always a lot of pushback on our articles. How do you push back against people who are trying to make you feel small or uninformed?
First off, I mean, I guess I pick my battles. Sometimes I just try to like let things go, because if it's transparently something where it's like someone trying to flex because they feel disempowered for whatever reason, I guess there's different ways to answer that. Like if it's someone who's coming out of the void to make an attack on an article, I try to, if I don't outright ignore it because I don't find merit with the critique, or have to like get back to the rest of my day, I'll like usually respond and just be like, I hear your concerns. You know, I only have so much room, but like this isn't the end of a conversation, blah, blah, blah. And usually they never respond to me again, because I don't think they expect to hear back from journalists when they email us. Or if they do, maybe sometimes there'll be like a quick email exchange, and then it's like, cool, I have a new potential source, in the best scenarios. If you're talking more so about like pushback from superiors and editors and publishers and things like that, it's a similar thing. Try to pick battles, but I try to argue for certain points where I think it's really important, and sometimes I win those struggles and sometimes I don't, but I think it's always better to kind of go through them, and especially if you can do it from a place of mutual respect as opposed to, why are you doing this? I just try to be as equitable and as respectful as I can in those kinds of interactions. I could give an example. There was an article once where I made a big point of, was talking about something that I believe and know to be a very like racialized issue, an issue that primarily surrounds like the ways in which black children are sort of talked about and vilified for certain things that have everything to do with poverty and like nothing to do with race outside of racial structures, blah, 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 whatever. Anyway, I made a point of including the terms predominantly black, and that was taken out of a first revision. I pushed back, I reinserted it. I said, like, this is why it's important, and then it stayed in. So I try to like pick those little battles when I can, because I think it's really important, and it ultimately shapes how we cover news in what I believe to be the most accurate way possible, which is when things are shrouded in the problems of structural racism in this country, to say that and be obvious about it. But then, yeah, it's like picking battles kind of where you can, and that's kind of how I do the pushback. I just try to come from a place of respect.
I mean, same. It really is about picking your battles. I mean, I dealt with this a lot more at the Sun than the Times, I will say. And if at the Times, I'm at this point where, I do not get upset. So if I get upset, it's like a thing, right? And that's how it should be, because people know what I feel very strongly about. And I'm very particular about how we describe children and families and conditions. All of a sudden, I think a couple of weeks ago, I think in the last like 2 stories, I've gotten children of color. That is not in the New York Times style guide, but there was like one conversation about it. I don't, do impoverished children. I don't. So once, your superiors, understand you, you have real conversations, make the case. I think if you have good ones, that those battles will become fewer and fewer. You know, from the outside, I deal with a lot of powerful people. And really the best thing that's happened to me, I would say as a reporter, is being underestimated. Like, the dimples confuse people. And I'm really reasonable, you know. Even, I mean, from Alonzo, when I first started covering him, the former superintendent, to people at the Department of Education, to folks in Congress, you know, I just, you know, I engage. I always engage, and I say, I hear you. And if they make a good argument, I'm okay with that. But I just leave it on the page. Like, at the end of the day, like, the battle lines are drawn when the story publishes, and then you know who you're dealing with from then on out. And then those battles become fewer and fewer. And if you're getting pushback from the administration at your school, do they give you money? Do they pay for your product? So let them cut off your funding. It'll be on that campus. And I love Freeman. I love Freeman. But no, really, like, you guys have to stand up for the power of the press. Like, they have a communications office. I talk to them a lot. I know they exist. You are not that. So, you know, that's something that's a battle you fight. If you want to be a journalist, that's the battle we fight every day. Not just at the Times, but also at the Sun. You know, if Luke Broadwater had, you know, cowered when Kathy Pugh told him that he was on a witch hunt in front of a group of people, things would look a little different, right? And so yeah, I mean, that's where your principles are worth fighting for. Words and sentences and stuff, those I always see as a negotiation to get what you ultimately want.
And I'll add quickly, like, two things that have helped me is, number one, searching for the people that look like me. So I remember when I got hired at City Paper, we were in the same building as the Sun, and I remember being like, where's Erica, or where's Andrea? Like, you know, and it doesn't mean that we're BFFs, but, like, that means that I'm gonna look for you, and those things are important. John, knowing I can reach out to him, like, those networks that you create are important to help you when you go into kind of those battlefields, whether it be like finding other queer people or other brown people, or I think that helps. And also when it comes to my writing or my work, is just like, I work really hard. So just like working as hard as I can. So if I have a piece, because my pieces are kind of weird news opinion hybrids, having editors that can be like, okay, this is your stance, like, let's look at it from all the angles, let's figure out that our arguments are strong, so that when the piece comes out and people start, you know, calling bullshit or whatever, like, I've already, and you could still think that it's bullshit, but I can explain to you very calmly, well, I did this because X, Y, Z. And so that kind of helps me understand, okay, I did the best I could do before this piece came out, and I stand behind it. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
The big one first. I have three questions. But the big one is, please, I'd like y'all to please speak to your connections to the torture and killing of journalists worldwide. And on a less serious note, Erica, you mentioned Betsy Devos. I'd like to know what you think about her.
She's not going to answer that.
She's not going to answer that. Okay. Well, I hope it's the same way I feel. Okay. So anyway, but I'd also like y'all to speak to the Chris Matthews debacle.
Go ahead and give your non-answer about Betsy Devos, because you're a reporter.
I know. Betsy Devos is fascinating. Yeah, I mean, she is fascinating. I can tell you like some facts. I mean, she's very wealthy.
She is.
She has advocated for choice most of her career. Yep, she is. Here's an interesting fun fact. I don't know. I will tell you that more people agree with what Betsy Devos has done than will admit it. Quietly, because they don't want to be on the wrong side of history. I'll tell you that. That I would write in the paper. I mean, it's, when she rescinded the discipline guidance, basically some guidelines that the Obama administration put out in 2014, actually unveiled them here in Baltimore, that sought to curb suspensions of black and brown children at disproportionate rates. I will tell you, here in Baltimore, I was a reporter here. The teachers here hated that guidance. They thought that discipline reform had genuinely made the schools unsafe. And this isn't a secret. Like, the principals, Jimmy Giddings, the head of the principals union, Marietta English, the head of the BTU, said it for years. And they weren't alone in urban school systems across the country. But when she did it, it was different. And I think I do wonder what it would, if things would be different, or if the sentiments would be different if she didn't work for this president. I just wonder, because at least in Washington, and out even in parts of the country, I think you would be surprised at how many people don't fundamentally hate her as much as you might think. And in terms of the journalists across the country, I mean, I'm not sure how much I can say about Times journalists, but it's an issue that we deal with. We know that there are some reporters at the Post who have had their lives at risk or taken. So it's a real issue.
You worked in Annapolis, right? You filled it in Annapolis after the shooting.
And then
at the
I was
Capitol.
just about to say, and then here in our own state, we had journalists cut down in their offices. And yes, I did go and help in Annapolis, but that was like for 2 days. I went to help the Sun, who had deployed a few people to the Capitol Gazette, and we came in as reinforcements to the Sun because they didn't have that many people to spare. So yeah, it's a real issue, and it's again one of those things, kind of like what's happening to the industry, is something that you can't really think about as you go about your job, or you can't fear, because otherwise I would be crazy to do this job. I have 2 babies, right? So yeah, that's it. What was the third question? Chris Matthews. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to that. I heard it happen on when I was driving, and I was like, sad for him. He had a long career, though. He'll be all right. Yeah, he'll have a radio show in like a week.
Right. Give us your hot takes, Samir.
I mean, I honestly second a lot of what Erica said, and then also, I mean, with regards to the Chris Matthews thing, I personally am uninformed about this thing, so I just don't want to comment on something I just don't know much about. I read a little item about it today, but I still don't feel like I know fully what happened. I've just kind of had my head in my work. So, as for some of the other stuff, I mean, I don't know. We are living in. I think that you see the suppression of media is not something that's new. It's happened before in this country and in other countries, and it's gonna keep on happening as long as there are people speaking truth to power. I yearn for a day when that's not happening, but as a human being, I yearn for that. But yeah, again, I don't know if I feel so well versed that I can comment on that beyond that. To be completely honest, so yeah, same with Devos, to be honest, because it's not what I focus on.
Okay. You have another question?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First, just a little background, and I really want to get into the role of journalists specifically in Baltimore. So for a little background, I'm a Baltimore native. I do genealogy, and my family came from the plantations of the Eastern Shore of Maryland to Baltimore in the 1700s. And I can track my family's progress or lack thereof in Baltimore City for about 200 years. So I'm saying this with the understanding that what the media portrays about Baltimore, historically and today, has very real consequences to the people that I know and love dearly. So my question to you with regard to, because I'm hard on the Sun paper, and I know that, and I'm of a certain age. So I remember when there were a couple additions to the Baltimore Sun. There was an Evening Sun and a Baltimore Sun. There was a Baltimore News American. There was an Afro, so there was competition. So my question to you specifically about the role of the Baltimore Sun in creating a record of the Black experience in Baltimore, and how you guys, when you were here in Baltimore and how you are today, what mechanisms do you think are in place or should be in place to help correct or establish a record to make sure that the history reflects the actual experiences that are going on in the city, not what politicians or the Baltimore police or what fits their specific narratives, but what mechanisms should be in place to counteract or to ask for corrections or explanations or a second story or a follow-up, or whether it's an ombudsman or whether it's a commentary section that the Baltimore Sun no longer has, to create a dialogue with the people who don't have voices or believe what they see in the record doesn't adequately reflect what's going on. And I'll just throw one word out to sort of encapsulate that, and that's squeegee kids.
I will let you go first. You're there now.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's a huge question. I'll qualify this by saying that I've been at the Sun for a grand total of 10 months. So, I mean, I think the biggest mechanism that we have in place probably is the letters to the editors section and the op-eds. I mean, I think that, folks on that desk have worked very hard over the time that I've been there and longer to try and use that page as a way of speaking to these things where people perhaps see deficits in our coverage or problems in our coverage or problems with the narratives around our coverage. I think that it's, and I hate to cop out and be like, oh, it's a complicated issue, but it's a little bit complicated just insofar as, these are not narratives that are new, right? I mean, this whole conversation about, squeegee workers has been following young people in the city for decades. It's not a new issue. I mean, this has been raised in the 80s and 90s and stuff too. So it's I think that changing things in terms of how we cover it is about as simple as changing everything that has led to a narrative sort of taking place. And I think that's just really difficult. But, letters to the editors and op-eds are a huge way of starting to counteract that, I think. I think if you see some of the changes that have happened writ large in the industry about how we cover different communities, I mean, they've started in part because of critiques that were leveled and sometimes critiques that existed in the pages of these papers. I don't know if there's a straight line relationship, but, I think that also part of it is it's honestly resources. I mean, when you talk about like framing and second follow-ups and all these things. These are only things that can happen if there are the resources, human, economic, that frankly a lot of papers in this country, the Sun included, just don't have. You know, we don't always have that luxury of being able to follow up. We have to sometimes follow and just like say something, write about something, and then go on to the next thing. So I think that like having those resources in place where we're revisiting things that's the mechanism to me, is the resources. That said, I mean, I don't think that this is something that is like unknown to our top brass. I just think it's something that it's going to take changes in resources that can enable a change in mindset about how we're reporting and what we consider a priority or how we prioritize things. And I think that is as true for every publication of our size with similar resources as it is for the Sun. So you don't just see this in Baltimore. I think you know, this is a problem that is wider spread than Baltimore.
Yeah, they just need more money and more people. That's what they need. And they need more people they need more black people. I mean, that's it. I mean, it's astounding what can pass through 3 white editors. I mean, really, I'm not, you know, and some of they're lovely, and I love my white editor that I had at the Sun for a long time, but I knew what to bring to her in the first place, right? And, you know, I think it's a travesty that this, you know, there's one major metro newspaper here. And so I know what you're saying, like, what in 50 years from now are our children going to go back and read about what we experienced in this city during this time? And it's a problem, and it can't be corrected now. And the Sun is struggling. There are dedicated journalists who don't see their own families, trying to cover other people's families, who are at the meetings. Yes, they're at City Hall. Yes, they're at police. And when we talk about those institutions in particular, that's just because those are the staples of any newspaper. Like, you cover City Hall, you cover the police department, you cover the school system. Hopefully, even though that one's going by the wayside at a few papers across the country as well. That's like one of the first beats to go. But yeah, I mean, it's you know, I'm starting to believe that black editors are maybe more important than black reporters, and so yeah, I mean, they just don't have the resources. I mean, the Sun is a different place than I started in 2010, you know, where there was Justin Fenton and Peter Herman, and I mean, you know, Peter was in the community at 6:00 a.m. You know, he was documenting and chronicling a different kind of crime story every single day. And you know, that doesn't exist anymore, and they're doing the best that they can, and you can't fault people for being who they're not. But I would hope that there are some affirmative steps to hire people who understand the value of what the Sun does as a historical record, not just as a daily news feed. And I worry about that a lot. As someone who was able to go on my first day and go to the librarian, who is no longer there, and say, "Can you pull that article from 1993?" And so, yeah, I mean, there's some promise there. There's a young man there, and that I'm thinking of in particular, and he gets it. I think he's going to be good. So I see some promise, even though there are a lot of people leaving the Sun. There are people coming in, not to be their spokesperson or whatever, because they do be doing some crazy stuff sometimes. But you know, everybody works hard, and I think with a couple of recent hires, they recognize that there are some areas where something's gotta give. Like, we can't proceed the way it's been going.
Okay, so we'll have one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Hello there. We spoke about the political tension that exists between what people see as journalists. If you ask the random person on the street what a journalist is, they will refer to Chris Matthews. They'll refer to cable TV personalities. But you just spoke about Erica. You just spoke about the value of being at the Baltimore Sun, where if somebody could not get an answer from the superintendent, they could call Erica, because Erica will get it. So what is that distinction between a local reporter and a national one? And what is the value of drawing that distinction out?
It's a great question.
That's a fantastic one, yeah.
I think that local reporters are more accountable, are held much more accountable, because they're accountable to a community who demands that the record be straight. I think, it's about having connection. As a national reporter in D.C., which is part of the reason that it was so difficult for me to take the job, but it's also the reason that I don't think there is one story that I've written that does not include a local superintendent or a teacher or someone who is affected by an issue that I've written about. Because, it's like we orient ourselves in this world through our connection to other people. We understand what we can see. And, we need to see ourselves in the media. And I think that is why local media is so important. Maybe a little, I would say, more important than national media. Now, what national media does, I think, is, it lets you know that you're not alone and no community exists in a silo. And what I'm able to do in my role, at least, and say, like, it's not just Baltimore, it's Flint, it's Detroit, and not just say it, but like go, right? It's not just Flint whose water was poisoning its residents. Like, it's starting to happen in Newark. So it just, I think national media brings, to light and brings home for us that we're not alone in whatever the struggle is. Whereas the local media is your day-to-day functioning. Like, you can't, how do you exist in a city or a place and you don't know what's going on around you? And if your local media isn't giving you that, you can demand it. You can call them. You see them. So anyway, I'm starting to repeat myself now, but I think that those are the values that each form brings to the landscape. Does that answer your question?
Sure. I can answer. I'll just add this. I agree with everything Erica said, but I'll add this from the sort of perspective of arts. I think when you talk about national arts coverage versus local arts coverage is something that is declining in a large way, and national is too. But when you think about like the great arts journalists, you think about people who had like national reach, who cover things at a national level. And that's great, and there's like some great things that get covered. I'm a big fan of the work of Craig Jenkins at New York Magazine, Lawrence Burney, who's from here at the Fader as well. But I think that, in terms of drawing a distinction, to me, the best art comes from smaller markets. It doesn't come, by the time things get to New York or to Atlanta or to LA or whatever, you're talking about things that have already gone through and been filtered through a certain system. People talk about how the best art is like raw and it's like gritty and it's done when people aren't looking and things like that. And Baltimore is a pretty like great example of a city that has an art scene that's filled with people like that. Because literally like people just think we're out here living the wire and they don't even know that there's an amazing art scene to be partaken in. And that's not true across the board. It's a little more complicated than that. But, I think, I don't know if that quite answers your question, but I do think that there is just, you pull the lens out, and that's just going to shift how you look at things, right? You have a picture that's taken from far away. You don't see all the things that you're going to see if that picture's zoomed in at the same resolution. So, like, I think that there's value to both. But the zoom in, you'll just see things that aren't being seen elsewhere. And I think that that's where the value is. And for me, insofar as that's like an orientation towards reporting, I think that that's something that's really important. It's something I always tried to channel when I was doing national reporting for Color Lines, because I was a national reporter there. But it's a little bit more difficult, especially when you're balancing that out with, I was fortunate enough in my time there to interview some national celebrities about big national stories, particularly for like movies and things like that. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just something I think about a lot because I am a local arts reporter who had a national background. And I think a lot just about how to keep what I do relevant and important and of service to people.
And you have the opportunity, I'm sorry, this is really important to me. I like to say I'm like a national reporter or a local reporter trapped in a national job. So, no, but you have, I think one thing I want to let you guys know is like, the value of having local reporters is, like, when I say accountability, they are accountable to you, and they like want to be, right? Like, so when I parachute into a city, I tell people when I'm talking to them, I'm like, look, I'm gonna leave. If you wanna do this, let's do it. I did this for a school in Louisiana. Went down there, turned the city upside down, and came right back on up here, right? And I would say to them, like, you should really talk to your local reporters because they are going to be able to stay on this. Like, when I leave and when this story comes out, like, I don't know how many more stories I'm going to be able to write for the Times. Like, I'll probably capture the turning points, but like, if you really want them to, you want someone to stay on this, you have to go to them. And the same is for the Sun. Like, they feel accountable to the community as well. And if you don't like something, you can call them. You really can. They are in your town, and they belong to this community too. Like, they're not out there exposing corruption because it's fun. They do it because it's wrong, right? And like, I mean, I really want to. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna-ish. Like, that's not my style. But like, people are working hard for the city, and like, if you want to see something different, they're at your disposal. And I just think people forget that. Like, you don't have to. You can call them out on Twitter. That's cool too. But like, call them and just be like, why? Like, why is this happening this way? Or email them and be like, I don't understand why you left this out. I mean, it happened. I mean, I don't know if people felt more comfortable with me, but it happened all the time when I covered the schools. And I'd be like, oh, man, like, I was either in a pinch for time or, like, I just didn't know. But next time I write about it, I'll include it. I mean, that's that's all it takes sometimes. So I don't know. It just feels like there's this, like, artificial barrier. There are people who come to the Sun because they want to be at a local newspaper. And they don't know the city the way some of us do. They just need help. They need a lesson. I mean, so that's all they need. They're just like people trying to do the right thing. Most of them.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you so much, Samir. I'm going to plug something before y'all leave. Erica is going to be at the Pratt with Wes Moore on April 19th. Is that bad? You want people to go, right?
I'm not saying it's
Oh, but go see her because she's amazing. Like, how could you not want to hear her talk more?
We're going to be talking about the riots, so y'all hear my spiel on the purge
uprising.
again. I know. Okay, see? This is something that we dealt with, too. And I was at Mondawmin. It was a riot. It was
So-
both. It was both.
So yes, go see Erica, April 19th. That information I know is on Facebook. I just found it online. I am going to be hosting a Blueprint for Baltimore City Council President Forum on March 18th. And that'll be at the Reginald F. Lewis. The last time we did a Blueprint forum, it was for mayor, and Brandon Scott got punched in the face. So hopefully no one, no one gets punched this time, but it should be a good time. Samir, do you have anything to plug?
Just follow my articles at the Sun, please.
Where's your ad?
Please read my articles. Oh, and then my Twitter handle is at a man called S. Rao, all one word. I have
R-A-O, right?
I have business cards with that handle on it too that I'm happy to pass out later as well. And it also has my email and my phone if you have tips and things like that.
And also, we can't do these kind of events without support from you guys at The Real News, so give us your money. Val's in the back, and she can help you with that. So again, thank you so much to both of you. Erica, you got taking time for
Yeah,
your
really
babies
appreciate
to
it.
come. Samir, I appreciate it so much.
Of course, thank you. We're happy to be here.